It was a typical scorching summer afternoon. One of those days when the heat seems to seep through the walls and every movement feels like wading through thick air. I had just wrapped up a hectic day at work, and all I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and unwind in the cool comfort of my air-conditioned house. With the temperature outside inching toward 100 degrees Fahrenheit, there was no way I was going to survive the night without the hum of my air conditioner, which had been a lifeline during these unbearably hot weeks. As soon as I stepped through the door, I flipped the switch to turn on the AC. The cool air began flowing almost immediately, and I sighed with relief. There's something deeply comforting about the hum of an air conditioner, almost like a gentle lullaby marking the beginning of peace after a long day. I kicked off my shoes, grabbed a cold drink from the fridge, and plopped down on the couch, ready to finally relax. The sound of the AC kicking in was like music to my ears, but little did I know that it would soon turn into a disruptive, unwelcome interruption. Just as I was about to settle into my spot and turn on the TV, I heard a knock at the door. I looked up, puzzled. Who could that be? Maybe a delivery or a neighbor needing something, I thought. It wasn't unusual for people in the neighborhood to pop over for small favors now and then, but I certainly wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I opened the door, expecting to see a friendly face, but instead standing there was none other than Karen, one of my neighbors. Now, I've always gotten along fine with Karen. She's that kind of person who's always friendly on the surface, but a little too opinionated when it comes to the finer details of everyday life. I didn't expect her to be upset, but she looked visibly agitated, her arms crossed tightly in front of her chest. This was strange. I'd never seen her so worked up. Before I even had a chance to greet her properly, she launched into her tirade. "Your air conditioner is making way too much noise, and I've had enough. I'm calling the cops," she blurted out, her voice rising with every word. I stood there, stunned, blinking in disbelief. I hadn't even processed what she had said. Was she serious? Was this some kind of joke? After all, it was the middle of summer. Of course, my air conditioner was running. Everyone's was. I tried to keep my composure, but I couldn't hide the confusion in my voice. "Karen, what are you talking about? The AC is just doing its job. It's the middle of summer, and it's hot out. What else would I be using to cool my house?" I asked, genuinely perplexed. She wasn't having it. Karen went on about how my AC unit was disrupting her peace, how she couldn't concentrate in her house, and how the hum of the machine was driving her crazy. I couldn't believe it. Was she seriously complaining about the sound of my air conditioner? Of all things to get upset about, this was beyond absurd. At first, I thought it might be some kind of joke. I mean, we've been neighbors for years. We've had friendly chats over the fence, shared the occasional bottle of wine, and even helped each other out with small tasks. I didn't know Karen to be this petty. But no, this wasn't a joke. She was dead serious. Karen was genuinely angry, and she was prepared to escalate the situation. "Karen," I said, trying to reason with her, "I don't know what you're expecting me to do. The AC is just normal noise. It's not like it's causing any major disruptions. It's just keeping my house cool." But she wouldn't listen. She kept going on about how unbearable the noise was for her, about how it was interrupting her peace and quiet. And then, to my shock, she pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly over the screen. "I'm calling the cops," she declared flatly. "This is a public disturbance, and I'm going to make sure something is done about it." I couldn't believe it. She wasn't even attempting to discuss it further or compromise in any way. It wasn't just about asking for a solution. It was about trying to force me to comply with her unrealistic demands. And here's the kicker. Karen didn't even live in my HOA, Homeowners Association. Her HOA had nothing to do with the neighborhood I lived in. Our communities were completely separate, yet she felt she had the right to tell me how to manage my property. As she dialed the number for the cops, I could feel the frustration welling up inside of me. How had we gone from friendly neighbors to this? The whole situation seemed ridiculous, but there was no point in arguing further with her at that moment. So I just shut the door, shook my head, and braced myself for what was sure to be an interesting, if not completely absurd, turn of events. I sat back down on the couch, bewildered by the whole interaction. What had just happened? I waited, almost in disbelief, for the next steps to unfold. Would the cops show up? Would Karen actually follow through with this madness? Only time would tell. I stood there, my mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. Karen had always been a bit of a busybody, but this was something else entirely. The level of drama she was stirring up over something as trivial as air conditioner noise was next level ridiculous. I couldn't help but wonder how anyone could possibly take such a minor issue so seriously. I kept thinking, she'll probably call the cops, and it'll be a waste of time. They'll show up, see that the AC is working perfectly fine, and then they'll just laugh it off. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Barely 10 minutes after Karen had called, I noticed flashing lights outside my window. The cops had arrived. My stomach dropped. The absurdity of the situation was starting to hit me. Why would the police even hear over an air conditioner? The last thing I expected was for this small, petty complaint to escalate into an actual police call. My heart started racing. I couldn't believe this was happening. This was not how I envisioned spending my evening. I walked outside, trying to stay calm, but I could already feel my frustration building. There were two officers standing near my front door, looking around in confusion. They glanced at each other and then at me, clearly unsure of what to make of this bizarre situation. One of the officers, a calm and collected guy with a no-nonsense attitude, stepped forward and explained that they had received a noise complaint about my AC unit. He said it with such seriousness that I nearly had to double-check if I was in some sort of weird dream. I couldn't help myself. I was incredulous. "Are you serious?" I asked, hoping this was some sort of mistake. But the officer only nodded solemnly and said, "We have to respond to every complaint, sir. Can you show us your AC unit and explain the situation?" I was speechless for a moment, but I knew I had to cooperate. There was no point in making the officer's job harder, and besides, I didn't want to escalate things further. I led the officers around the side of the house to where the AC unit was located. It was running quietly, just as it always did, humming away like any normal air conditioning system. The noise was barely noticeable, a soft hum that blended in with the sounds of the street, like the gentle buzz of a refrigerator, or the quiet purr of a fan. As we approached the AC unit, I could see that the officers weren't exactly sure what they were supposed to be looking for. They inspected the machine, and I noticed one nodding in approval. The officer who had initially spoken to me turned to me with a raised eyebrow, clearly perplexed by the situation. He said, "This is perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with the noise level at all. It's just an air conditioning unit." Relief washed over me, but at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of embarrassment. Here I was, standing in front of my house with two cops, all because of a noise complaint about an appliance that was functioning exactly as it should. It was beyond absurd. The officer turned to Karen, who was standing at the edge of my driveway, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, watching the whole scene unfold. Her face was bright red, and it was clear that she wasn't happy with the outcome. I could tell she was hoping for a different result, maybe expecting the officers to side with her and demand that I turn off my air conditioner, or make some sort of compromise. But that wasn't going to happen. The officer looked back at me and then at Karen. "Do you have any issues with your neighbor, ma'am?" he asked, trying to get to the bottom of this. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but she hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the question. Her earlier confidence had evaporated. There was an awkward silence, and Karen had nothing to say. She just stood there, seething with frustration, her arms still crossed in defiance. The officer, seemingly done with the situation, turned back to me and nodded. "All right, sir," he said. "You're free to go. We can't do anything about this. Just keep the noise at a reasonable level, and we shouldn't have any more issues." I was stunned. I couldn't believe this was the resolution. The police had been called out, they had inspected the AC, and they confirmed that there was nothing wrong with it. The case was closed. It felt like a surreal moment, like some kind of bad sitcom scenario, but it was real life. As soon as the officers left, Karen stormed off without a word, clearly furious. She didn't even look back at me. I couldn't help but shake my head, laughing a little to myself. The absurdity of it all still hadn't completely sunk in. Why would anyone call the cops over something as small as an AC unit running on a hot day? The whole ordeal felt like it was out of a different world. But despite everything, I decided to let it go. I went back inside, closing the door behind me, and tried to shake off the frustration. As I sat down, I couldn't help but feel a little bit better. The officers had sided with me, and the whole situation was now officially behind me. Or so I thought. Little did I know, Karen wasn't quite done yet, but at least for now, the AC would remain on, and my evening of relaxation could finally begin, though not without a lingering sense of disbelief. A few days after the incident with Karen and the cops, I thought things would settle down. It had been a bizarre few hours, but I figured it was just one of those weird neighborly issues that would eventually blow over. Unfortunately, I couldn't have been more wrong. It was a normal Tuesday afternoon when I opened my mailbox to find an envelope from the HOA. My stomach sank as soon as I saw the logo. This was the last thing I needed. It seemed that Karen, not content with involving the police, had escalated things further by filing a formal complaint with the Homeowners Association. The letter from the HOA was a formal notice asking me to explain the noise issue that had been reported. I stared at the letter for a moment, trying to digest what was happening. This was getting even more frustrating. Not only had Karen caused a scene by calling the cops over the sound of my air conditioner, but now my HOA was involved as well. I had never had a problem with them before, and I didn't think it would escalate to this point. The last thing I wanted was to be caught in the middle of a neighborhood squabble. I could feel my blood pressure rising. This was exactly the kind of petty drama that I had worked hard to avoid. But I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I couldn't let Karen's overreaction dictate my life, especially when I knew I was in the right. So I decided to take action. I wrote a detailed letter to the HOA, calmly explaining that the complaint was completely baseless. I emphasized that my AC unit was functioning normally and well within the acceptable noise limits, citing that the police had already visited my property and confirmed this. I attached a copy of the police report to the letter for reference, making it clear that the authorities had deemed the complaint unwarranted and had dismissed it outright. I made sure to state that I would not tolerate being dragged into an unnecessary dispute based on unreasonable complaints. The last thing I wanted was for Karen's antics to affect my reputation or my relationship with the HOA. Once the letter was sent, I felt a sense of relief. I had done my part to stand up for myself, and I knew the HOA would have to acknowledge that Karen's claims had no real merit. The next few days passed without incident, and I hoped that would be the end of it. But of course, it wasn't that simple. The HOA responded quickly, much quicker than I expected. They acknowledged the situation and informed me that they were officially closing the case. The letter also included an apology for the inconvenience caused. They assured me that they would be addressing the matter with Karen, though they didn't go into detail about what steps they would take. I felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. On one hand, I was glad that the issue had been resolved, and I was no longer under any scrutiny from the owner. But on the other hand, it was irritating that I had been dragged into this mess in the first place. The whole situation could have been avoided if Karen had simply approached me like an adult, instead of resorting to calling the cops and making a public spectacle of a trivial issue. Then came the next twist in this bizarre saga. A week later, I ran into Karen at the mailbox. She was standing there, her head down, fumbling with a letter in her hands. As soon as she saw me, she quickly looked away, clearly avoiding eye contact. I could tell she was embarrassed. Her usual confrontational attitude seemed to have disappeared. In fact, it seemed like she wanted to pretend like nothing had happened. It was almost funny how quickly the roles had reversed. Just days earlier, she had been so confident in her actions, calling the cops and filing complaints without any regard for the consequences. Now, she couldn't even look me in the eye. Part of me wanted to say something, to confront her about her behavior, but I decided it wasn't worth it. This was her problem, not mine. The last thing I needed was to get sucked back into her drama. So I just smiled politely, gave her a nod, and continued on my way. I wasn't going to let her actions define me or ruin my day any longer. I had made my point. I wasn't going to be bullied or dragged into petty neighborhood squabbles. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few weeks, Karen still tried to make trouble in subtle ways. She would send vague complaints to the HOA about noise levels, and every so often I'd see her watching me from her window, her eyes narrowed as if she were waiting for me to slip up. It was almost as if she couldn't let go of the drama she had started, but no matter what she did, I refused to engage. I kept my head down and continued to live my life without letting her negativity affect me. It was clear to me now that some people just thrive on conflict, and no matter how ridiculous it might seem, they won't stop until they've stirred something up. But I had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the best way to deal with petty people is to stand your ground, stay calm, and never let them get the best of you. It took a while for the tension to dissipate, but eventually Karen backed off. Whether it was the HOA addressing her complaints or simply realizing that her efforts weren't going to get her anywhere, she stopped trying to stir the pot. And me? I was finally able to enjoy a peaceful summer again with my AC running as it should without any more unnecessary drama. In the end, I had emerged from the ordeal with a renewed sense of confidence. No matter what life throws at me, I know that I can handle it, and I won't let petty complaints or dramatic neighbors control my peace of mind.